In this video, I'm going to tell you a couple of more rules about when to use commas. The first rule I like to think of as the rule of lists. And this rule says that if you have 3 or more items in a list, you separate those items with commas. So for example, if I have 3 adjectives describing my bunny, small, fuzzy, cute, then I need to separate them with commas. The bunny is small, comma, fuzzy, comma, and cute. Here's another example. The English professor, me maybe, adjusted her glasses, comma, shuffled her notes, comma, and began her lecture. So in this case, my list is really of 3 verbs, adjusted, shuffled, and began. And you can see that you can list words, or you can list little phrases, adjusted her glasses, shuffled her notes, began her lecture. Last example, you can have the money, comma, the fame, comma, or the happiness. So in this case, I've changed my list a little bit because instead of using and, I've used or, which means you can't have all 3. You can only have one of those items in the list. So when we talk about lists, we can list things in the more conventional way using and before the last item, or you can list it in the way that suggests that you can only have one of the items in the list by using or. Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of little additional rules about this. The first one is to remind you that the rule of lists only applies when you have 2 things. If I said the bunny is small and fuzzy, there would be no comma before the and. It would just say small and fuzzy. It's only when you have 3 or more items. The second one is to talk to you about the controversy about what we call either the Oxford comma, the Harvard comma, or the serial comma. And Oxford or Harvard refers to the publishing presses, the Oxford Press and the Harvard Press, and I guess they always use the comma that I'm going to tell you about right now. It's also called the serial comma. And this is a rule that says that there should be a comma before the last item. So if you look at these lists, there's always an and or an or before the last item in the list. And so the comma that you put before the and here, or before the or here is called the Oxford or Harvard or serial comma. Some people say that you should have that comma before the and to make things very clear. And other people say, well, if you already have the and there, then you don't really need the comma, right? Because the and is signaling to you, okay, this is the last item in the list. Same with the or. I tend to use the Oxford comma, Harvard comma, or serial comma because I had a professor whose name was Professor English, and he said to use that comma. So I figure if you're a professor of English and your name is Professor English, people should listen to you. Also because if you want to write about literature, you generally tend to use this comma. If you're looking at a career in journalism, newspapers don't tend to use this comma. So there you go. Okay, the next rule for when to use a comma is between city and state. So you would say Philadelphia, comma, PA, or Brooklyn, comma, New York, right? And you also use it between the date and the year. So September 2nd, comma, 2010. And that's really because if you go like this, it's kind of hard to distinguish between the numbers. So you slap that comma in there for clarity. The next rule is to set off what we call a direct quotation. And a direct quotation is when the quotation is inside of quotation marks. And what is inside the quotation marks is exactly as it appeared in the original. So whenever you quote a quote using quotation marks, you want to put a comma before the quote. Emily Dickinson wrote, comma, much madness is divinest sense. Notice also that you can put the little phrase saying who said it in the middle of it. Right, in the middle of the sentence, you could say, I told you, comma, she said, comma, to bring your hat. And in this case, the rule says that wherever the quotation touches this sort of sentence or this sort of phrase saying who said it, you should put the comma on either side. Now, a direct quotation is different from what we call an indirect quote. And another way to think of an indirect quote is to think of it as a paraphrase. And this is when you're not quoting exactly what the person said, you're putting what they said in your own words. And in that case, you do not use a comma. Emily Dickinson means, so here I wouldn't put a comma here because there's no direct quote. Emily Dickinson means that people who appear to be crazy might actually know more than we suspect. And that is a paraphrase or an indirect quote version of this line of poetry from Emily Dickinson, much madness is divinest sense. So what we think of as crazy might actually be very sensible and might even be sensible or something that we've gotten from the divine. So those are the comma rules. I hope that they were clear. If you have any questions, bring them to class.